The 18th of March, 1937, in the East Texas town of New London. Just another school day in Russ County on the edge of the vast oil fields. This school district was one of the wealthiest in the nation, thanks to the lavish spending in oil dollars that had been rolling in since the discovery of the East Texas oil field 7 years earlier. New London School was the pride and joy of the local community, a large modern structure built to accommodate the influx of families attracted by the oil boom. It was a high school with an elementary attached and featured state-of-the-art facilities, including the first football field in East Texas to have stadium lighting and a heating system powered by natural gas, a choice that later doomed this school. On the 18th of March, elementary school students were dismissed at 3 p.m., with the remaining 500 high school students scheduled to leave 30 minutes later at 3:30. At approximately 3:17 p.m., agonizingly close to the end of the school day that would have prevented the worst school tragedy in US history, a sanding machine roared into life in the workshop class, and the horror began. An explosion tore through the school with such ferocity that the roof blew upward before crashing back down, collapsing the walls and the floors onto the occupants within. The blast was felt for miles, and a frantic rescue effort soon began. Parents, emergency workers, and community members worked tirelessly, digging through the rubble in a desperate search for survivors. The exact death toll still remains uncertain due to the condition of the bodies and the confusion during the rescue efforts, but it was around 294, most of them children. The disaster left a profound scar on the community. Virtually every family in New London was directly affected by the loss of a child, a relative, or a friend. In an instant, an entire generation of New London was gone. Before the oil discovery, New London was primarily agricultural, with a small population engaged in farming and small-scale trade. With the Depression looming, this was precisely the place that would have expected to see the worst of it. However, as luck would have it, oil prospectors, or wildcatters as they're known, struck oil in 1930, and the subsequent economic boom attracted thousands of workers, engineers, and their families who were seeking prosperity. New London's population swelled rapidly, and with this influx of wealth and people, the town's infrastructure quickly expanded. Roads, businesses, and homes sprang up almost overnight. The oil boom was on, and this otherwise unremarkable rural area had struck black gold. With its newfound wealth, the community placed a strong emphasis on education, believing it to be the cornerstone of civic pride and progress. In 1932, the residents funded the construction of a new school, which was one of the largest in the region at the time of completion. At a cost of $1 million, or $23 million today, it was also one of the most expensive schools of its kind thus far in the US. Its design reflected a contemporary approach to educational environments with large, airy classrooms, a state-of-the-art laboratory, and spacious communal areas. Constructed as an E-shape, the school had a California Spanish star with a red tiled roof. It was a beautiful construction, undoubtedly a wonderful place to gain an education. The community's pride in their school was obvious, and it drew educators from across the state who were eager to teach in such a facility. Things were looking real good for New London. One difference of opinion between architects and the school board during the construction phase would eventually come back to haunt the entire community. When the school was being designed, architects suggested a boiler and steam system, but the school board insisted on 72 individual gas-powered heaters to be installed throughout the new school. This was normal with similar systems found across the United States, but it was a decision that was going to have consequences. In 1937, 5 years after the school's completion, the school board began looking for ways to save money, and their massive gas bill each month of $300 or $6,000 today became a focus. At the time, tapping into the residue gas line of the local oil company, Parade Gasoline in New London, was a widespread practice. When you extract oil, you often get natural gas along with it, which is typically burnt off during extraction. If you could tap into the pipes, companies would usually turn a blind eye because it was something they had no use for and needed to discard anyway. Now, this sounds absurdly dangerous to us today, but it was common in the 1930s, especially as the bite of the Depression intensified. It's unclear how it was done or what authorization was given, but overnight, New London's school gas bill dropped to zero. The gas used was odorless and colorless, making leaks hard to detect, a fact that would prove fatal. When children started filing into school on the 18th of March 1937, there was no indication of the carnage that was about to unfold. Several students complained of headaches or nausea, but this was seen as a typical school day with hundreds of children in one place. What nobody knew at the time was that while students and teachers went about their usual activities above, a leak below the school had been slowly pumping gas into the basement. Looking back in hindsight, the timing of the disaster could not have been crueler. The school bell rang at 3 p.m., and elementary students began filing out. Some headed home immediately, while others waited for their parents, attending a PTA meeting in the gymnasium just 30 meters from the main building. As the clock ticked past 3:15 p.m., no doubt there would have been plenty of fidgeting as the remaining students became eager to get out of school, eyes flicking back and forth to the clock, time suddenly dragging far slower than it was just an hour before. Just 15 minutes until the next bell would signal the mass school exodus that would save hundreds of lives. But it was not to be. At 3:17 p.m., Lemmy R. Butler, instructor of manual training, turned on the electric sander known as Old Sparky thanks to its checkered safety record. Instantly, the enormous accumulation of natural gas beneath the school ignited. Eyewitnesses told of how the school bulged before the roof was torn skyward. The main wing of the structure immediately collapsed, followed by a deadly silence. There was no need for any alarms. Everybody within a 6-kilometer or 4-mile radius heard the blast. Parents, many of whom were at work in the oil fields and nearby towns, along with just about everybody else in the area, rushed to the scene, unsure of what they would find. As news of the disaster spread, the site of the New London School quickly became chaotic. Frantic parents and townspeople arrived to dig through the rubble with whatever tools they could find, from their bare hands to farm implements. Local businesses closed as everyone converged to help with the rescue effort, which was both heroic and harrowing. Volunteers and first responders worked tirelessly, forming human chains to remove the rubble. Car headlights and temporary floodlights illuminated the scene through the night as the community continued its desperate search for survivors. Every so often, the chaotic noise would quieten for rescuers to listen for the voices of those still trapped. New London didn't have its own hospital, but remarkably, one was due to open the following day in the nearby town of Tyler. However, it quickly became overwhelmed, and makeshift triage centers were set up to treat the injured. Doctors and nurses from surrounding areas rushed to New London to assist. In the days following the explosion, more than 500 injured individuals were treated, with hospitals operating well beyond their capacity. The New London disaster brought a significant response, not just from the local community, but from many across the nation. Aid poured in from all corners of Texas and beyond. The Red Cross and other humanitarian organizations coordinated relief efforts, managed donations, and supported the victims and their families. Governor James Allred dispatched the Texas Rangers and National Guard units to maintain order and assist in recovery operations. Fire departments and emergency services from as far away as Dallas and Houston were called in. Trained rescue teams brought in specialized equipment to help lift heavy debris and clear the site, hoping to find more survivors or recover yet more bodies. The horror of identification was the final heartbreaking phase. The explosion had left human remains scattered all across the site. Many bodies couldn't be identified or even their gender recognized. One student survivor said, "I saw fathers fight over dead children like dogs over a bone, yelling, 'That's mine, no mine.' I saw children who looked like roadkill. You couldn't tell if it was a boy, girl, or what." Fingerprinting experts were eventually called in to assist, and due to a strange slice of luck that had seen most children in the area fingerprinted for the Texas Centennial Exposition the previous summer, the majority of the dead could finally be identified. Memorial services were held at a rate of 3 or 4 an hour at the local cemetery, which dedicated an entire area to victims of the tragedy. The physical and emotional recovery from the New London School explosion was lengthy, and it was painful. The governor of Texas ordered a full inquiry into the disaster, but investigators initially struggled to decipher what had happened because so much of the evidence had simply been obliterated. Eventually, a faulty connection was deemed the cause when the school tapped into the gas lines. Anger toward the school board and Parade Gasoline quickly began to rise. Despite this evidence, no members of the school board or school officials were found responsible for the explosion, which infuriated the local community. Lawsuits were brought against the board and Parade Gasoline, but a court ruled that neither could be held directly liable. Superintendent W.C. Shaw was forced to resign amid furious talk of lynching. The man himself had lost a son, a niece, and a nephew in the explosion. The most immediate and significant change in the US was the mandatory odorization of natural gas. Within months of the explosion, the Texas legislature passed a law requiring all natural gas distributed to customers to be mixed with a malodorant, making leaks detectable by smell. This legislative action by Texas set a precedent that was soon followed by other states and eventually became a standard practice nationwide. This simple yet effective measure had undoubtedly prevented countless accidents and saved numerous lives by making gas leaks detectable. Beyond the specific issue of gas safety, the disaster prompted a broader re-evaluation of building and construction codes, especially for educational institutions. Building codes were revised to improve safety standards, including better electrical wiring practices, enhanced heating systems, and stricter controls on building materials to ensure they were fire-resistant and structurally sound. Local and state governments began to require that school designs be approved by certified architects who would adhere to these stricter safety codes. Inspections became more rigorous and frequent, identifying risks that could lead to similar disasters. The New London explosion also highlighted deficiencies in school emergency preparedness and response capabilities. In its aftermath, schools nationwide began implementing regular safety drills, including evacuation procedures in case of fire, gas leaks, or other emergencies. Training for school staff on handling these situations became standard, ensuring that all school personnel could guide students to safety in an organized and timely manner. On a broader scale, the tragedy impacted regulations governing public utilities. The oversight of utility companies intensified, and stricter regulations were implemented regarding the maintenance and monitoring of gas lines. State public utility commissions were empowered to enforce these regulations more stringently, requiring regular inspections and immediate repairs of gas systems. Utility companies were also mandated to keep detailed records of their infrastructure and any incidents. These records helped regulatory bodies monitor compliance with safety standards and facilitated quicker responses to potential hazards. The New London school explosion remains the worst US school disaster in the nation's history. Over 75 years later, the wounds caused by the explosion are still healing. For a long time, few spoke of the events, while many moved away from the city, choosing to start a new life somewhere else rather than face the daily reminder of what happened in New London. There has been a more open approach to the tragedy in recent years, with several documentaries and books appearing on the topic. Most of the survivors have now passed away, but trauma like this is often passed down through generations. Family members recount how their grandparents spoke of the terror of what happened, lying under the rubble, unsure whether they would ever make it out alive before finally being pulled free, only to emerge into a world of unspeakable pain where everything had changed.